We rejoin the adventure in a room filled with goblin corpses. 3 dead whilst the other 2 fled through the northern door, the sight of Korac with his bloodied axe more than they could handle. Here, in this goblin outpost within the Sunless Citadel, we stopped for a moment to gather our thoughts. As the rage left Korac, I rifled through the bodies, finding a silver flask with some foul-smelling goblin wine and a small, rusty key. As I was doing this, Meepo fearfully told us to beware the hunter. I asked him who this was, and he replied it was Baldrag, the Goblin King. I told the group in no uncertain terms that if he looked anything like Jareth, I'd happily take him back to the Fey Realm with me. Tethlis, eager to press ahead and go after Ballsack, I think he misheard the name, and tried to catch the fleeing goblins before they could fetch reinforcements, decided to go straight through the northern door rather than wasting time opening it. We followed him into another corridor, a wooden door opposite us and the corridor mostly going to the west, with another door at the end. Tethlis pointed out that the path to the door opposite looked to be well used, whereas the route to the left was far less travelled. Elrohir checked the door for traps. Finding none and seeing the door was unlocked, he attempted to open it, only to realise that it was barred on the other side. Korac, never one to let something as trivial as a bit of wood stand in his way, coaxed the door into opening with a well-aimed donkey kick. Well, we certainly found the fleeing goblins. The room we had just infiltrated contained a campfire, 5 goblins, and a couple of giant rats, none of whom seemed pleased by this sudden interruption. I was first to see through the doorway and took a quick shot with my crossbow before ducking back out of sight. My haste meant my aim was off and I hit nothing but stone. Gergus moved into the doorway, sacred flames shooting from his hands, a blast of divinity keeping the goblins from rushing to us. Korac moved to enter the room, the 2 rats scurrying to meet him in the threshold. 2 of the goblins took aim with their bows, but neither managed to hit their mark. The rats made their attacks, lunging at the half-orc's legs. 1 rat failed to find purchase, but the other managed to sink its teeth into Korac, doing some serious toothy damage. Elrohir readied an arrow as Korac moved out of the doorway, dodging the rats who now had a taste for him. Elrohir loosed his arrow, shooting it deep into the heart of the goblin Gergus seared earlier, finishing him off. Korac swung his axe at the rat which still had his blood round its mouth, whack-a-mole style, into oblivion. You see, it really isn't as hard as Will Wheaton makes out.
So I swing my axe.
And I roll a 2.
All right, so as you swing your axe for the first batch of rats, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to see where the compost pile and the rats separate.
I'm very unhappy about that. Okay, 3.
Armed and joined the rest of its crew.
Getting warmed up! And a 1.
This time, in an angry fury that you are being stifled by what is essentially sewer rats.
That's a 13.
It's a 13 that hits.
Oh, hey, rats.
Oh.
Rats are kind of easy to hit.
All right.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Tethlis was overcome by the smell coming from the room and took a moment to recover himself. I drew my rapier and managed to hit the remaining rat, but not hard enough to finish it off. Gergus moved closer to the open doorway and saw that a 6th goblin had entered the room. Quite how, we couldn't tell. There only appeared to be 1 doorway in the room. This goblin was dressed more fashionably and carried an aura of authority about her. He directed another blast of sacred flame at her, ducking out as arrows bounced off his chainmail. It's at this point that everything turned. This gave Tethlis all the time he needed to regroup. and with renewed vigour he ran forwards, a hand axe in each hand. He aimed the first axe at one of the goblins, throwing it wide and watching it bounce off the wall. He threw the second axe at the tenacious rat that was still attempting to chew on Korac, missing it by a whisker. Angered by this, the rat turned its attention towards Tethlis, only to be pinned to the floor by my rapier. I lifted it up and turned to Meepo to offer it to him as a snack, barely noticing the goblin that was coming through the door behind me as it took a swipe, hitting only air. A second goblin followed behind it, both now going for Tethlis, perceiving him to be the greatest threat. Gergus managed to swipe with his warhammer, still glowing with the light cantrip he cast on it, landing a literally light blow. Both Tethlis and Elrohir now noticed the goblin shaman as she began casting a spell through the open door. They both managed to dodge the green bubble of sickly green which flew towards them from her hands, watching it splatter harmlessly into the stone wall behind them. Elrohir fired another arrow but missed his mark. Korac, seeing his friend attacked, rushed straight at the shaman, axe ready for blood. He body-slammed the other goblins out of the way, but wasn't able to get close enough to her to hit. He stamped on the head of one of the wounded goblins, which he had knocked to the floor, ending it quickly, turning to give the shaman a wicked grin. Gergus and I found ourselves flanking the doorway and the goblins coming through it, so we both made attacks, neither of us doing much to halt them. I was able to grab my lute, strum a beautiful melody, and sing to Tethlis to inspire him. "Let the bodies hit the floor! Let the bodies hit the floor!" Tethlis was so into my rendition that he failed to hit with his next attack. The goblin whacked him hard. The sneaky bugger was able to dodge away too quickly for Tethlis to make any attack of retaliation. The goblins then turned to Gergus, critically wounding him, the curved black goblin blade finding the gaps in his chainmail. Gergus managed to shake off the onset of system shock and used Wrath of the Storm to cast a thunderous rebuke, but he was too badly injured for it to take much effect. Korac, alone in the room with the shaman and one remaining goblin, found himself hit with a volley of arrows. The shaman tried to cast lightning on Korac, but his intimidating appearance threw her off, and she fled, the goblin in the room with her following through a small fissure in the wall, hidden by mounds of, well, I'd rather not know. With most of us now bloodied, we were beginning to panic, our attacks missing or only landing glancing blows. We knew that this might be a battle we may not all survive. When you realise that the lives of the people you've come to care about, to regard as friends, are on the line, well, we saw how Korac reacted to the spell cast at Elrohir. I channeled all my anger into my final charge, running one of the goblins straight through with my blade. Gergus mustered what little strength he had left, slicing the other goblin in two, before falling against the wall, bleeding and breathing heavily. We all took a moment to catch our breath. The danger, for now, lessened. I quickly rifled through the corpses, finding 6 silver pieces, which I shared amongst the group. Tethlis searched for anything to help heal our wounds, but to no avail. Perhaps my priorities aren't quite in the right place. We backtracked past the hallway with the caltrops to a room where we felt we could rest safely. We spent an hour tending our injuries, eating, and planning our next move. Once we felt stronger, we returned to the room where this chapter began. 2 wooden doors, one locked. The key I had found. Elrohir, still a little affected by the battle which had transpired, went to inspect the door for traps. After a couple of moments, he confidently patted the wall he had been checking, declaring that it was, indeed, a door. I sighed and went to check the actual door for traps and casting Mage Hand. Finding nothing suspicious, I carefully put the key into the lock and turned it. We stood back, readying ourselves for more combat, and Mage Hand then pushed the door open before slipping the key back to me. Instead of enemies, we were confronted by a large spike in the ground to which 3 kobolds were tied with rope. Manacles against the walls held skeletal remains, and a cage at the far end held a creature almost too big for its confines. Elrohir entered first, followed by me. Meepo rushed in, and when the kobolds saw him, they began talking animatedly in Draconic. A voice in the cage called out in Common for help. Tethlis and Gergus went up to the cage, the light cantrip on Gergus's warhammer showing the gnome inside the cage, weak and miserable. He told us his name was Uruk-hai Timberlin, and that he had been heading to the Shrine of Pelor in Oakhurst when he was set upon by goblins who brought him to this prison. Seeing the apparent animosity between the gnome and the kobolds, who had clearly been chucking their shit at the caged gnome, I told both parties, in my best mum voice, that they were not to attack each other. Tethlis used brute strength to tear the cage apart, whilst Meepo set about freeing the kobolds. And this is where we end today. Adventuring isn't always about glory or riches. Sometimes it's just about making sure all of your friends survive.